Welcome to an Epiphany with Tiffany. My name is Tiffany, and I've just had an epiphany. This podcast is all about Christian singles looking for community. Christian dating can be quite a mess these days. I'll share stories from my guests and practical tips for successful love. Dating shouldn't be this hard, right? So grab your favorite snack or drink and curl up with this episode, and you might just have an epiphany of your own. In this very first episode of the What Women Think series, I had the pleasure of having a conversation with a beautiful individual. She's 30, single, technically has never been on a date, but don't let that stop you from listening to her amazing wisdom as she shares some awesome perspectives on current dating culture, church culture, and the lack of community for Christian singles in church right now. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Take a listen right now. All right. So thank you for filling out all those, all the questions. I know there were a lot. Okay. So I just kind of want to start with like a little bit of your background. I know you said you haven't really dated, right?
Mm-mm.
Okay. It's a struggle. Okay. So how long have you been in the faith?
So just before I turned 14, and I'm 30 going on 31 now. So.
Okay, cool. So a while. Awesome. Are you in a season of singleness, or you just haven't found anybody to?
I mean, I just put it this way. I've been single since conception, or like single since, because scripture says that before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you. Like, I guess you can range that, before you were in your mother's womb, you were single.
Okay. Yeah. So you just haven't wanted to date, or just haven't found somebody to date?
I mean, I'll say when I was like a little girl, particularly when I was in like my preteen years and early adolescence, that's something that I really wanted. Granted, I was like a lonely and bullied child, throughout different points of my childhood. And obviously getting older and realizing, okay, A, that wouldn't have satisfied me, but B, it's a 12-year-old couldn't me dating, but that's a completely different. Okay.
I agree, though. I look at these kids nowadays and I'm like, what?
Here's the thing, though. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 30 going on 31, and that's when I was in middle school, when I entered middle school in 6th grade, that's when kids started dating. And it's now looking back on it, it's okay, why are these 11 and 12-year-olds dating? I don't even think high schoolers should date seriously, but that's another thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be 34, so I agree. I look at these youngins and I'm just like, y'all don't even know. You don't know. And don't get me wrong. I have a lot of friends that got married young and they've been making it work. Right. But at the same time, sometimes I look at my life and go, yeah, I had no business trying to get married in my 20s. I really didn't. But that was the path that God had me on. So, but everybody's different. So anyway, Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, I love how you said you don't falsify your photos. So same. I don't understand. I get a lot. I get the reason why these guys ask this question that, why do you use fake pictures basically? But for me, it's so frustrating because I'm I don't do that. And the majority of my friends don't do that.
Yeah.
So it's what women are you looking at, you know, that are doing that? But
I mean, obviously people lie, but that's not something that's restricted to women, though. I mean, I've heard of stories and where men have falsified their photos, or a lot of times, if not that, lied about their age, or lied about their height, or lied about their weight, or lied about how much money they make. So the notion that only women, whether online or in person, that women just there's this band I really called Amberlin, and one of their earliest songs is called Foreign Language. I mean, to be fair, I don't necessarily care for their first album as much as some of their other ones, but I remember hearing the lyric like boys speak foreign language and girls just lie or something like that. And like, it's just one of those things where it's like, ooh, yeah, I can't get down with that lyric. And I kind of wonder, okay, lead singer, like, how does he feel about that now that he has 3 daughters of his own and like he's married? Like, it's just, I don't know. Anywho, it's just like, deception in the dating market isn't just restricted to women. Like, men lie too and are deceptive. I mean, the heart is deceitful above all things, like the human heart.
Amen. I love the way that you said that. That was perfection. And I think that that points to like something else that this kind of touches on is like the culture, right? Like, not only is dating culture in the Christian realm just nuts, like if you throw in the added aspect of the world we live in and like how much that plays a role in our culture as Christians and believers, it's like, well, no wonder we as the both genders are having such struggles, because we have all these other outside influences, and like people who, in my experience, I've had a lot of guys that are like, oh yeah, I'm Christian. But then when you dive into it, they're really not following Christ. And I feel like that goes both ways, and so I think maybe this is just me projecting, but I think that some of like the issues with pictures and like the falsification and all of that is like, it connects down to the root of them not really following what they believe or what they say they believe.
Yeah. I mean, you can find that in both genders, but I feel like this is just not just my, like, well, it's not an opinion, it's just a general observation. Like, I feel like, I mean, this happens, like I said, it happens with women too, but I feel like and there are like solid Christian guys, like, don't get me wrong, but I mean, like, proportionally speaking, like, you go like globally, like the amount of like Christian men between the ages of 22 and 40 who are genuinely on fire for Jesus and who are like, following him and who are single, proportionally speaking, is less than like, the women, their female counterparts,
Yeah.
It's like, I know I've met good Christian guys and like, I value them and I appreciate them, but I mean, it's just like objective realities and based on your feelings. Like, I mean, you go to the vast majority of churches like all around the world and you always see more single women who are ardent for the Lord and proportionally speaking aren't there in the pews or.
Yeah, I agree. It's very frustrating. That was another question I was going to ask about like your church. I was going to say like, or ask the question, is it mostly women or is it like kind of a mix?
Oh, well, the church I go to now that I'm a member of, I mean, there's a mix, I guess you could say. To be fair, I'm still, I guess you can say, relatively new to that church because I became a member in May. And like, I haven't been here in Minneapolis, not even a year. But from what I've seen, yeah, I mean, there are some guys, but I can't necessarily say like I see quite a few married couples and like quite a few of like, the younger guys are like, part of those couples that like married in college or like, Bible school or what have you. Kind of play into that stereotype. But then again, there are several Bible schools here in Minneapolis, so that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I guess I had to like observe like a bit more. I mean, I know of at least like a couple of single guys who are, like older, younger singles, but it's not that many.
Okay, cool. Well, not cool, but thank you for answering that. like I've been noticing that a lot lately, like the demographically speaking, and it's all over the country. I went to a church when I was out in North Carolina, and the majority of the people there were women or couples. Like I saw very few guys that I could have assumed were single, and I'm like, what is this? Like, it's so weird. And the same thing at my church, like my personal church. And there's a ton of married couples, ages like, from super young all the way up, right? And then like there's just a handful of us singles, and it's like, what is happening? But I also kind of wanted to ask, like, what has been your experience with like your churches as far as like ministering to singles? Have you experienced anything like that?
So what was my home church in North Carolina, they have like an unmarried ministry, but I mean, I'm not sure, because like with the pandemic, like they started like all of their specific groups started meeting online, but I'm not sure if as of yet they've resumed meeting in person, that sort of thing. I also lived in Spain for 7 years, and they didn't have like the churches I was a part of, particularly the one in Madrid, which is where I lived in the majority of my time in Spain. They didn't have necessarily like a single specific group. They did have a young adults group, which, especially my first couple of years in Madrid really helped me in maturing my faith. And I met quite a few like really, really solid people in my time in Spain, particularly in my time in Madrid. But not as of yet. Like I've spoken to some of the leaders of my church several times, and like they're really in like my church now here in Minneapolis, and about something for specifically those 30, or heck, if you're 29 or 28, okay, I guess we could let you like, who are single, you're not married, like the biblical definition of being single. And they're really into it because apparently before the pandemic, they had something like that where like, they would meet regularly and that sort of thing. But pandemic and the married couple who was heading it, apparently their marriage fell apart. So like the ministry also fell apart. And I also like gave some, suggestions. They're really wanting to do something like that again. And like one of the main suggestions I said was obviously I would volunteer for it, but I would like for there to at least be one guy leadership mix, just because better or for worse, a lot of times men might only go if like there's a guy there. But also it's like, men are also called to fellowship. Well, ideally it wouldn't be a place for you, like, oh, this is a meat market. Like that's not like if somebody wants to get their Mac on or something, that's their prerogative, because whether you're single by choice, whether God gave you the gift of singleness, or like, whether you've never had a love story, quote unquote, so to speak, at all, which, is the case of myself and a lot of other people. Like you shouldn't forsake community, especially in people who are in a similar stage of life or place as you are.
Yes, amen. Agreed. I feel the same way. It's so difficult sometimes to find that community. And I think more churches need to work on that. So you're not the only one who was like, I don't understand this question with the whole first date thing. So the question was, when going on a first date before having met in real life, how much do you consider cost? Do you understand if the guy doesn't want to invest too much until after you meet, or does that make you think he's cheap and we will dismiss him? So it was funny. A lot of girls were like, what? But I think what he was trying to ask kind of points back to some of the other cultural stuff that we know is an issue as far as like what men think women want. They want 6 foot, 6 figures, 6-pack, right? Which is, in my opinion, total BS. That's not what I'm looking for at all.
Red pill, like incel
Yeah. There are points of some of the red pill stuff that I'm like, okay, I think that's a good point, but it's still not, some of it isn't even biblical. That's a whole other thing. But some of the stuff that actually aligns more with like biblical principles, I'm like, okay, that's fine. But you still need to handle it in a different way. And you still need to be a man that is worthy of respect and submission. But that's another rant for another day.
Oh, yeah. Speak on it, Tiffany. Speak on it.
Well, that's going to be a rant for another day. I've been ranting about that topic for a lot lately. But so I think, though, that the way he was trying to ask that question is like, you know, I guess.
Who is he?
Oh, I can't say who it was. I only know who it was because this person submitted a couple of the questions. And so that's the only reason I know who it was. The rest of the questions, I actually don't know who submitted them. And so anyway, yeah, but I think the reason, or he didn't ask it in the right way, but I didn't want to like reword the question because that's how he wrote it, you know? So, but I think what he was trying to ask is like points back to that whole thing. Like, is that important to you? Is money like, you know, basically, are you going to not be interested in a guy because he wants to, quote, go lighter on the first few dates?
I mean, to be fair, full disclosure, I've never been on a proper date. Like, I've never been like, you know, on a date, but I can just go from knowing me and like, you know, like what I can, you know, assume. But for me, it depends. Like if it's something like, you know, if there's intention behind it and it's, you know, and quite frankly, if I don't have to pay for it, like, you know, and it's something that's actually, you know, meaningful and fun or whatever, like, I knew a girl, granted, she lived in London, which is one of the most exciting cities in the world, you know, so there's a lot to do. But she said she went on a date where the guy came and he brought a jar full of like spare change and spare notes and whatnot. And he's like, okay, this is the money we have. So let's go around the city and see how we can like spend it and that sort of thing. And that ended up being, she said, one of like her favorite dates that she had ever been on, you know. So something like that, like, you know, that's spontaneous or, you know, fun or what have you, that's cool. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love coffee, I love tea, but just like doing that for like a first date and not doing something afterwards, like maybe a visit to a cool museum exhibit or going to a planetarium or something. It's like, it's not necessarily about like a lot of times, yes, activities do require money, but it's also like the effort and the consideration and the thought put behind it, you know. How are you making it like memorable? How are you making it, or, you know, just all out fun or interesting or, you know, quirky, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Such a good point. That was perfect. I love that example. That sounds like such a fun date.
Well, particularly if you live in like a big city where there's like a lot of things to do and nooks and crannies to explore.
Heck yeah. Oh my gosh. That is like, now I kind of want to go to London and just be like, this is my jar of cash to take myself on a date. That sounds like so much fun. I love your response to what do you find most attractive in men?
Remember what I said?
Oh, you said besides well-developed delts.
I mean, I do love like looking at a man with broad, well-developed shoulders, but that's...
Girl, same. To me, like, and it's so funny because I've said that to people before, like not said well-developed delts, but just basically like I like shoulders, you know. And I've had guys go, oh, well, then that means you want a fit guy, and I'm like, no, because a guy can have broad shoulders. Yeah, sorry, guys can have broad shoulders and still not be like super fit, but I'm still going to be attracted to that because it all has to do with how you hug me. And if you hug me and I feel safe,
yes,
that's all I want.
See, here's the thing for me. So when I was and I still do. I will still say, like, physically, like, I go crazy for like really tall, really skinny, or like, slender guys. Like, I love like tall and lanky ever since I was a teenager, really. But as I've gotten older, I definitely have come to appreciate guys who have muscle. You don't have to have like, an 8-pack if you're like cut, or like, like I said, you have well developed delts, or like, the veiny forearms or what have you. Like, but I mean, I would say currently it's like, like you don't have to be muscular. The fact that you're like, a lot of guys, like I said, who I liked or I have liked since I was a teenager, are like string beans, basically.
Mm-hmm. I love the way you said that, though. But I think that also points into a lot of guys' perceptions of like the whole 666 thing, which we're not even going to go into the fact that that's basically the devil's number, but whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's so wrong. But anyway, that's another rant. But like, I feel like with women, our attraction level is so varied. Like me, I have dated all different types of guys. And, most people assume, well, most guys that I've talked to, like, assume, oh, this is the type of guy that I want. And I'm like, okay, but let me show you my exes. You know what I mean? I'm like, I got this guy over here who was like a skinny twig. And then I had this guy who was like extremely built. And then I had another guy who was like, dad bod city, and I'm just like, but I was extremely attracted to all of them. And it had more to do with their personality than their physical attributes. I mean, obviously I was physically attracted to them too, but it had more to do with their varied personalities, that I was like, yes, this is who I want to date right now because of, I'm attracted to that part of you, not so much the physical. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me see. Yes, on a shrivelous man, because doors do not open themselves. Agreed, girl. Agreed. I cannot stand it when a guy doesn't open a door. I'm like, what am I, chopped liver? Like, what the?
I mean, also bear in mind that I'm Southern. So like, yeah. I mean, obviously you have a-holes everywhere. And like, and like, especially in this generation, like a lot of chivalry is declining, but I mean, just in general, like the courtesy, because not even just like, if I'm like about to enter a store and I see you behind me, like I'm gonna hold the door, but it's just like, like I really love like, like just Southern boys do that, at least traditional, like, Southern boys with like a lot of old school manners, like, like holding the door open or pulling out the chair or like, like making sure you walk on like the inside of the side or that sort of thing. It's just, I mean, just we do it better in the South. What can I say?
I would have to agree. Again, because I was just in North Carolina. And so all week long, I had doors held open for me. I had the whole actual eye contact. What? Like, I don't get that here. And
hey, where is here for you?
California. Yeah, so that's why. I mean, there are some decent guys out here. I've had many guys just, that strangers hold open doors and stuff like that. But I get that more when I go somewhere else, is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So anyway, but that's the other reason why I like traveling is, you get to experience the different cultural norms in these other places. And you're right. Like the South does that so much better than I feel like anywhere else. But yeah, I no longer mind the yes ma'ams and no ma'ams.
Yeah, it kind of makes you feel old when someone pulls out the ma'am.
So this other question, do you believe that there's only one person for you? I want to touch on this a little bit because I feel like Christians, especially those who are raised in the church, we get this like mindset that, God is writing our love story, right? And it's going to be perfect and it's going to be this one person and we just have to wait to find them. But that's not actually accurate. So I just kind of wanted to ask, like, how do you feel about that? Do you, have you experienced that kind of like stuff in church where, you know, it's like the whole God's going to write your love story. You just have to wait for the one, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that, like, you know, not just necessarily in church, but throughout Christian culture saying, like, you know, a God written love story. And, like, you know, I agree with that notion. But, you know, I feel like it's very naive, but also just not biblical. Like, well, hold up. Okay. In certain, there are certain examples in the Bible where there was like the one, like with Isaac and Rebecca, for example. Yeah, and Adam and Eve, obviously. But, you know, it's just like where there was, you know, specifically one person for, you know, a certain person. But, you know, even like today, like that's rare. Like I have met couples who, you know, according to them, it's like, you know, okay, God, people say like, oh, God told me you were a spouse. Like, no, like they were legitimately told, and it was confirmed that like that their spouse like was their spouse. So I mean, I'm not ruling that out. And like it does happen, but that's rare comparatively speaking, you know. So in general, for the vast majority of people, like the one for you is the one that you commit to. And even for those people who like God did either through, you know, like prophecy and words of knowledge or something like that, or like a dream or a vision, like did show them their spouse, at the end of the day, they had to choose to commit to that person.
I agree. And I think that's another thing, like where we in the general Christian realm, right, will get like caught up on the whole free will versus not free will side of things, because you still have the right and the ability to make that choice. And you can, and my belief is that you can make it work with not anybody, but a majority of people, as long as you're willing to put in the work. You know, like if you match up on these things, right? Like your list of things, your core values, then at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And, you know,
but I feel like I mean, a lot of people are super naive, not only with like the idea that like, oh, there just has to be this one person between like 7 billion people. Who is like, you know, my one. Like, unless God did really reveal to you, like, okay, he had like a specific ideal person in mind for you, but also the notion, like, you know, a long time ago, one of my friends, like, he told me that, like, you know, like, hey, like, as long as she's Christian and good looking, then, like, you know, I can make it work with like any girl, like, you know, because I've been with girls with various personalities and that sort of thing. And granted, he was still a baby Christian at the time. And it's like, dude, you're not taking into account things like, you know, assignment, especially. Like if you're called to like stay in one particular place, meanwhile she's called to be an itinerant missionary. That's a clash right there, you know? And also just, you know, just other different things that like, yeah, with compromise, a lot of the times these things can't work, but I mean, there are just some things that like will make you functionally incompatible for the course of the long run, especially when it comes to assignment.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like you have to be like connected in that aspect. You can't be with somebody that's, you know, got this other calling on their life, like that wouldn't work. Like for me, well, not for me, but like I have a friend who is going into full-time ministry. So she needs somebody who's going to be in full-time ministry, you know, and it's like she has struggled for a very long time with that because the majority of the guys that she's talked to have not been like on that level, you know, and she has struggled in the sense that, you know, she's often wondered if she's just going to end up not marrying anybody because, you know, there's a lot of people in the Christian world right now that don't have that calling or don't like present as, you know, wanting to be in ministry. Right. So it's kind of like that whole mindset of, am I just going to be, not just be alone, but am I going to end up being alone because like, people aren't going into ministry, and especially where she's going to be. But yeah, anyway, yeah, just is a good point too, of like being aligned in that way. Like, I think a lot of Christians sometimes will focus on like being politically aligned or being, aligned, on like basic biblical principles, but they won't dive into like those bigger areas as far as like what ministry looks like and all that, which is why I asked those questions about ministry too, in the questionnaire, because I feel like some people just don't think about that. I love your response for what does a provider look like? Someone who covers all the basic expenses of living. Yes, that's the bare minimum. Agreed. But beyond that, someone who gives emotional, mental, and spiritual nourishment and safety. Can you kind of like expand on that a little bit?
Like, okay, like I think it's in one of Paul's letters to Timothy or Titus, where like Paul says that if a man doesn't provide for his household, he's worse than an unbeliever. So I mean, physical provision is really the bare minimum. And I'm somebody who, I know a lot of red pillars are not going to like this, but I definitely am for women, indulging in their naturally hypergamous, I guess, wiring. Because, okay, when I say hypergamy, I mean it's like when a woman like mates with or like marries a man who makes more money than her. It doesn't mean like, okay, he's a millionaire or whatever. I mean, like, you make 60,000 and your husband makes 70,000. That in and of itself is hypergamy. But a lot of people don't like to hear this, particularly red pillars or men who, just are like, oh, all women care about is money. But like women as a whole, there are some exceptions, but the vast majority of us are wired to want a man to provide. And like I said, provision, like monetary provision is like the bare minimum requirement. But, it's more than that. Beyond that, what you build that on that basis of physical provision is, does he care for you emotionally? Like, is he verbally abusive? Like, or does he build you up? Spiritually, of course, being believers, like, does he exhort you? Does he pray for you? Does he pray with you? Does he listen to God, not just for himself, but on behalf of like, y'all's family, yeah, spiritually, mentally, psychologically, that sort of thing. Like that, all of that goes into like, okay, what is a provider man? It's not just the physical, I mean, like the, monetary provision, but that is like the bare minimum, base requirement, but it goes beyond that as well. So does he nourish you, in all those other sort of esoteric, ephemeral ways, rather than just, okay, does he put food on the table?
Amen. Again, that was perfect. Okay, I'm glad that I had you expand on that. I also loved your response for what does spiritual maturity look like for you? Placing the validity of God's word over your feelings, regularly reading and meditating on scripture, being an active member or participant in a local church, giving room for the Spirit to speak into your life. I think that's like another big thing there, because you mentioned earlier that you're a member of your church, which is awesome. So am I. And I think a lot of like our generation don't realize the value in being in membership within an actual church. I don't know how your church does it, but like mine is very, specific. Like this is your responsibility as a member. You attend meetings, you vote on things as a whole church and like all that stuff. And I think culturally speaking, like millennials specifically, don't realize the ability or not the ability, they don't realize the benefits of having that kind of community, because we already talked about community as like singles, but like being a part of the church as a whole, even as a single person, and like what that looks like. So if you want to like kind of expand on like how your church does it.
Basically, my current church is, okay, do you like, are you a believer? Are you a follower of Christ Jesus? But also, do you like agree with, sort of like I guess the key foundational, like, beliefs, like, the kind of like secondary, like, doctrinal, or like, how things process with City View Church or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's it. And like, you are able to vote on the different things and what have you. But I mean, it's just like, I get that people experience church hurt or what have you, but at the same time, it's like, we're called not to forsake the fellowship, like, and that sort of thing. And it's like, if you go into an organization or an entity expecting that no one will ever hurt you, then I mean, that's just naivety. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just super naive. And it's like, like, there would be no other reason why in like the epistles, why there's so many regulations for not just like an elder or like a deacon or what have you, but also like what we should do within congregations. Like, if we weren't intended to be like regular members of like a Bible believing church,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. It's perfect. Totally agree. It's like I took a long time to become a member of my church, but it's also the church that I grew up in, so it's like I've always attended there, but I hadn't taken that step to become like an official member. And I did a few years back because at that point in time I was working on developing a ministry, and then COVID happened. And then God basically was like, okay, we're not going to do this right now. And I'm like, okay, fine. But anyway, so I took that step because like my church was very specific on like, you cannot be leading a ministry unless, you are a member, because you have to, basically say you agree with all these things, like the secondary issues, and then obviously the doctrinal stuff. And, and all of that. But ever since then, it's been like really cool to actually have a voice, like when you go to the meetings and stuff like that. Because I think that's another thing that some people don't realize. Like if you're having an issue within the church, like you're struggling with whatever, if you're a member, you can like go to the meeting and be like, hey, I have an issue with this, and actually have your voice be heard, instead of it just being like letting that like anger or bitterness or whatever the struggle is like fester, because I feel like a lot of people don't, they hold on to it instead of speaking about it, and so like the meeting aspects, or even just being a member and being able to go to the pastor and be like, hey, I noticed this, or like I have a question about this in the budget, or like whatever the issue may be, it's just, it's so much better to be in that aspect instead of, on the outskirts.
Yeah.
And again, it's a community thing. So how important is integrity? You put a 10. So yes, girl. I've been talking to a lot of girls lately, or women lately, about that. Like we feel with the friends that I've had these conversations with, like we feel like integrity is just missing, and we don't know why. And we feel like, it connects into so many other things like communication and just their level of maturity, either spiritually or just physically or mentally mature. But anyway, like, do you have any other thoughts like on integrity?
No, but I mean, it's just like, let your no be no, and your yes be yes. Like,
yes. Agreed. Okay. Effective communication, look or sound like saying what needs to be said in the correct way. Okay. So can you expand on that? Like do you have an example of what you mean by saying what needs to be said in the correct way?
like, okay, I'm a very blunt person and I despise passive aggressiveness. Um, so like one of the things that genuinely makes me angry is when people, for example, that they don't tell me like, what they actually mean, what they actually want to say, like directly to my face, and they go through like a third party. And when I say, like, okay, you can come to me. I'm not going to bite your head off. Like, I mean, you know, say what needs to be said, to say it in like a correct way, meaning they'll go talking out your neck sideways at me, like, like with like a decent tone, or like, with like a respectful, like, tone. That's what I mean by saying things correctly, Um, so yeah.
Okay, cool. That's perfect. I agree. I am very blunt. And passivity is like, it's such a turn off. Again, that's a rant for a different episode. But okay, if a man has genuinely become interested in you long distance, would you explore that? And what if you haven't been or aren't open to long distance? Would you rather him be honest and tell you of his interests or keep that to himself?
Well, yeah, and I speak as somebody who's never been married or never been like on a date, let alone like dating relationship. But I don't know. I mean, theoretically, if I were ever to like encounter somebody who I was interested in, who was actually interested in me, which hasn't happened, like I suppose I would,
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious. I was like, that's a good question because I feel like the long distance thing is becoming a bigger topic because a lot of people
like for mostly more so for, I mean, there are a lot of girls who that's a deal breaker for, but I feel like more so for guys, for some reason, that's like a deal breaker. Maybe that's just my perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to agree with that though. I feel like because I'm open to long distance. And so personally, like the guys that I've encountered, that is the thing that ends up not working out is that I'm not where they are right now. And I'm like, and why say that you're open to long distance if you really aren't?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would have to agree with that. That guys, it seems to be a bigger trip up for guys. I understand like with women who are single moms, like that is probably not going to be something that they're going to be open to just because of kids and stuff like that. So it's kind of, difficult in that aspect. But yeah, I would agree that it's mostly seems to be a guy thing. Although this was brought by a guy, so. But I also know who submitted that one, and I know why he's asking that one.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Did you want to throw anything else in before I let you go?
I mean, I don't know. Like I said, all this is from the perspective of somebody who's never, like, I guess how some people say like, oh, I was a late bloomer, or I'm like a never bloomer. So I mean, you can take my responses with a grain of salt, but I don't know. I just base like my responses on like my own observations and like from what I've observed, like knowing myself, like what I like or what I would go off of. So take that as it were.
Yeah, but I appreciate that perspective though, because like you said, how you know yourself, right? And like that's so important. A lot of people go into relationships not knowing who they really are, and they expect that relationship is going to, be their end all be all and going to, help them figure it out. But like I feel like it's super important to know yourself before you enter that kind of like those serious relationships, because that's just, I mean, obviously we're always learning, but like having the base knowledge of who you are, how you're going to respond to certain things. Obviously there are other aspects of life that we have no idea how we would respond to because we've never experienced it, right? But again, your perspective is still needed, so I really appreciate it. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the stories and the perspectives that were shared in this episode. Please share it with a friend whose dating life might need some help. Wink, wink. If you want to connect with me on social media, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at @AnEpipWithTiff. I really hope to see you there. There are multiple ways that you can support my show. You can pray for me, rate, review, and share any episode that you love. Or you can even financially contribute by going to patreon.com/An-Epiphany with Tiffany. Until next time, I'm Tiffany, and I hope you just had an epiphany.